Hi, my name is Adam, and I am the Sage in Exile. Uh, this is my very first attempt at doing any kind of YouTube video or a YouTube channel. I am 55 years old, and I think that my obvious inexperience will show through in a number of ways, primarily lack of production quality. But I hope you'll stick with me because I feel like I have some knowledge to impart that we all need desperately to know at this point. Uh, Initially, I was simply going to do this channel to kind of advertise my vocal services. I want to get involved in voiceover work. I do some accents and I do some character voices, and I'm good for doing voice narration. I worked at a radio station early on in Baton Rouge, a 100,000 watt FM station, WXLT 94.1, Sunny 94, where we play only the best hits from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and today. Now, granted, that was back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I'm sure that a lot of DJ stylings are very different now. But the point is, I have made a living with my voice before, and I would like to do so again. But some things have been going on in this country that I feel like need to be addressed. That I feel like it's our duty as American citizens to try and stand up against. And so I'm going to try and do that first and foremost by trying to spread what I feel is the most important information, which is how we've been manipulated and how that led to us coming here. And the reason I wanted to do this primarily is there was a what do you call it? A post on X. It used to be a tweet on Twitter, which made a lot of sense, was nice and alliterative, it was catchy, it was good marketing. But now we have X, and I guess X's on X, posts on X, whatever it is, it's lame and in no way compares to the Twitter functionality that existed before. Once again, illustrating Musk's absolute genius as a businessman. On X, he posted that something to the effect of, I'm seeing the phrase or the word oligarchy thrown about a lot, and do you people not already know that the ruling elite, the rich, have always run things in this country, and why don't we just eliminate the middleman, meaning get rid of politicians and lawmakers and just let the rich run things? Now, this is simultaneously the truest and arguably the stupidest thing that I've heard Musk say, personally. He's not wrong. He's absolutely right. And I will hopefully help to illustrate how this became the case and why I say he is right. But the amazing thing about it to me is although it's true, it's not very smart to say. If you're part of a ruling elite that runs things from the shadows, it's not a very bright idea to shine the spotlight on yourself and say, hey guys, we've been doing it all along to you. It seems like one of the first and most basic rules of a secret society, a secret ruling elite, would be the secret part. So anyway, but he's not wrong. And this was done to us consciously. This was done to us over decades. And it all starts, in my opinion, with a man named Edward Bernays. Now, Edward Bernays is a name you probably aren't familiar with. However, he was the American-born nephew of a man you'll probably be very familiar with, Sigmund Freud. Now, Freud pioneered the psychoanalytic technique. And a lot of that has come under fire. Like, for example, the very idea that anything longer than it is broad is a penis. Yes, that's come under some considerable fire by other schools of thought and other psychiatrists along the way. But the thing that he did tap into, the thing I feel he was absolutely right about, is that human beings, by and large, are influenced an incredible amount by these primal forces within us. In essence, fight or flight type responses corresponding to anger, fear, that kind of thing. Primarily, those two are the ones that are the easiest to manipulate. It's very easy to make someone angry. It's pretty easy to make someone frightened. Not so easy to make someone love, although I would say that that is also a primal emotion that drives us. But the point is, Edward Bernays was the first to take these techniques from Freud and say, these work on the individual scale, but what if they also work on the mass scale? And in essence, they work very, very well, and that's where a lot of our trouble begins. Prior to World War I, the then president, a man named Woodrow Wilson, president of the United States, formed a group called the CPI, the Committee on Public Information, which is in and of itself an amazing bit of propaganda, because this committee was not there to just disseminate information to the American public so that they could make of it what they would. This was put together in an effort to sell the war to the American public, and also to sell the idea that we would be spreading democracy throughout the world, and that was a good thing. Now, for those of us in America, this initially sounds like a very sort of altruistic goal. We're going to share our democracy with people who might not have it. We're going to give freedom to those who have been oppressed, and so on. But I want you to consider the source. Woodrow Wilson was an overt, energetic racist. At the end of the Civil War, government offices had been desegregated, and you were allowed to work side by side with people of both colors, many colors, etc. Woodrow Wilson, during his tenure in the White House, let the government offices resegregate. Let them say, no, we don't want to work with those people in our offices, and so on. He also championed a film called Birth of a Nation. It was a love letter by a man named D.W. Griffith to the Ku Klux Klan. In essence, he portrayed the Ku Klux Klan as these sort of pure knights who were going to come forward and save our society from the invasion of the rampaging Negro hordes. And again, this is not me speaking, this is sort of terminology of the time. That's what the Klan was there to do, was to defend us from these horrible, it's just absolutely, vomitous that this was not only put out there on a public scale, but that Woodrow Wilson himself championed it. He loved the film. He screened it in the White House. And there was a famous quote at the time from him, and if I'm not misremembering, it basically said that this film was like, quote, writing history with lightning. So this is the guy who wants to spread his version of democracy to the rest of the world, his version of freedom to the rest of the world. And to do it, he created the CPI, two of the members of which were Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays. Now, Walter Lippmann was arguably the most influential political writer of his time, and you can look him up. I encourage you to do so. But the reason I've gone with Bernays and focused on him is because Edward Bernays seems to have taken the ball that Lippmann started out with and carried it to distances and heights that could not have been foreseen by combining what was already known about marketing and advertising with Freud's psychoanalytic techniques. Now I'm jumping a bit ahead here because eventually propaganda begins to get kind of a bad name, and Bernays goes into spin mode to try and save that, and successfully does so. But in 1928, he published a book that is simply called Propaganda. It's in reverse, sorry about that. But it's simply titled Propaganda. And the opening paragraph of propaganda is as follows, and I think you should hear this. It's called Organizing Chaos, the first chapter, and it starts out by saying, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is the logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. We are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. To bind and guide the world. Now, this was published publicly. This was available to anyone who could buy the book, and it has been around since 1928. So, 100 years. And yet, most of us are unfamiliar with Edward Bernays. We all know Freud, but we're completely unaware of Bernays, and by and large. And even when I was in college, which I didn't graduate college, I don't have a degree, and I'm not claiming to be that educated. Even when I was in college studying sociology with a minor in history and taking psych courses simply because I felt like they would be complementary to the prior two, when I discovered Edward Bernays, a classmate of mine, a guy named Greg, who I'm still friends with, turned me on to Bernays. And as soon as I was aware of him, I was stunned by how much he had influenced things and by how unknown he was in spite of that. And I actually went to the sociology department and asked, if there were any courses in which Bernays was taught. No. Went to the psychology department. Are there any courses in which Bernays is taught? No. Went to the business school, to marketing and advertising professors, and asked if there were any courses in which Bernays was. No. So here's a man who probably influenced our culture more than any other single individual that I can name, and he is almost completely untaught and almost completely unknown. And I think that's on purpose, because if you are using psychology to manipulate people, then the last thing you want to do is give them the handbook on how that was done to them. And that's what I want to do for us all. I want all of us to be aware of Edward Bernays. I want you to share this video. Please feel free to comment on it, and just let as many people as you can know about Edward Bernays, because the idea of an elite ruling class in this country is one that we've all kind of accepted. Yeah, the money men run things, but then if you try and directly state that, people talk about how you are a conspiracy theorist and men in dark rooms chomping cigars, running things from the shadows. Well, they do. Do they all get together and have meetings? No, I don't think so. But I do think that if you're filthy rich, then your interests tend to align with other people who are filthy rich, and that you will work together to enact certain things. And that's what's been done to us over the course of time. So after the CPI very successfully sold the war, World War I in America, Bernays, who was actually taken to the Paris Peace Accords because of how successful his work was. He was taken along with Woodrow Wilson to the treaty signing. And he started to think to himself, well, if I can use these techniques and these ideas to sell a war, then surely during peacetime, I can use them to sell just about anything else I want. And this is where our troubles as a nation really begin, in my opinion. What Bernays realized quickly is that for most people, particularly when they are gathered together in groups, is that it was emotion and not rational argumentation that was going to manipulate them. It wasn't any kind of logical argument anymore. See, up until that point, up until Bernays really started implementing this, the way you swayed public opinion was by creating what you thought was an indefensible argument and then presenting that to people and counting on their rationality, counting on them to look at the pros and cons, look at the massive evidence on this side and the lack of evidence on that side, and to use your rational mind to choose between the two. And that all you had to do to win an argument, to sway the public, to get what you wanted, was to present the best logical argument. And Bernays realized pretty quickly after using some of these techniques that that wasn't necessary. You didn't have to create a brilliantly articulated argument. You didn't have to stack evidence or provide proofs. You just had to manipulate people's emotions. Now, I'm going to give some examples as we go through this of the differing things he did, and go through the most insidious of them, in my opinion. One of the most basic for Americans, bacon and eggs for breakfast every day. Now, it's true that we are descendants of the English, and it is true that the English do have bacon and eggs for breakfast sometimes. However, having bacon and eggs every morning for breakfast is something that Bernays kind of sold to us. He was hired by a company to sell more bacon. And so he basically sent out these kind of leading questionnaires to different medical people, saying something along the lines of, is it better to eat more or less? Is a heavy breakfast better than a light breakfast? If you have a hard day of work ahead of you, that kind of thing. And of course, doctors came back and said, well, yeah, generally speaking, more food means more energy, and so a heavy breakfast. So immediately, Bernays was like, doctors say that a heavy breakfast is better than, and you know what's ideal with a heavy breakfast? Bacon and eggs. Eggs and bacon. Together they form... The very concept of this is one that was sold to us by a man who was just trying to peddle bacon. One of the most basic precepts, one of the things in America that we just take for granted, bacon and eggs for breakfast, was the result of an ad campaign, and a very deceptive ad campaign. And that's just kind of an idea how that works. And yes, we are descended from the English. Yes, they do bacon and eggs, but as a general rule, bacon and eggs are not an everyday breakfast in England. They're part of what's called like the full English breakfast, and they generally do that on weekends. It's just not healthy. Bacon and eggs for breakfast every day is not a healthy start to your day. But that idea was sold to us as a good one by Edward Bernays, who was simply trying to fulfill a client's desires to sell more bacon. And that's just one example. The most insidious that I mean, there are so many, so it's hard to say most insidious, but the one that first came to my attention that seemed truly, truly evil, totally without regard for the people that he was affecting. Bernays was hired by George Hill, who was then the president of the American Tobacco Corporation, to sell cigarettes to women. In the 1920s, women were not supposed to smoke cigarettes in public. It was taboo. It was déclassé. You were not a proper lady if you would smoke cigarettes in public in full view of other people. So as a result, tobacco companies were losing out on about half their market. So this George Hill came to Bernays and said, can you break this taboo? Can you help us to sell cigarettes to women? And Bernays said, let me think about it. So the New York Easter Day Parade was a huge deal at the time. Lots of people gathered, and lots of people, I mean, it still is, but at the time, it was really big. And so what Bernays did was he convinced a group of young, pretty debutantes to go to the parade and at a certain point to start marching along with it. And then at a given signal from him, they would pull out these cigarettes that they had been hiding and light up. Now, in the meantime, Bernays had gone to different newspaper companies and basically said that he had heard that there was going to be a suffragette protest at the Easter Day parade, and that basically they were planning to protest by lighting up what they called torches of freedom, that being the cigarette. Now, I want you to think about how insidious this is. This guy was hired by a tobacco company to sell more of its product. So what he does is he gets young girls to light up cigarettes called torches of freedom in public, thereby linking the idea of freedom itself, the idea to women that they are standing up and striking a blow against the patriarchy that is oppressing them. He's invoking the image of the Statue of Liberty on a subconscious level. I mean, if you think about a woman holding aloft a torch of freedom, what's the first thing as an American that's going to pop into your mind? It's the Statue of Liberty. So he created an emotional connection between all those things, between freedom, striking against the patriarchy, the Statue of Liberty itself, the American ideal of individualism, and all of these things linked together. And none of it was in aid of any of that. It wasn't about freedom. It wasn't about standing up to the patriarchy. It was about selling cigarettes to women, and breaking the social taboo was merely an incidental thing. And you can argue that it was a good thing, I guess, and that it was a stupid taboo to begin with. But the end result is to sell more cancer sticks to an entirely new class of women. And that ad campaign took such hold that when I was growing up, I was born in '69, I was a child in the '70s and all that, and growing up, my mother smoked, and she smoked a particular brand, both her and my grandmother, Virginia Slims. Now, the Virginia Slims ad campaign, literally through all of my youth, would be a picture in a magazine of these, a woman back in the 1800s scrubbing clothes, or and then it would show a woman. Eventually, these ads would show these women going from a place of utter servitude and being mere washerwomen at home to being corporate executive women out on the pencil skirt with a business suit and high heels, leading industry, all the while with a Virginia Slim cigarette. In essence, that idea that, and the tagline to those ads was, "You've come a long way, baby." So the idea being that they have progressed through the years to where they have freedom to lead industry and to smoke cigarettes if they want to. And that all starts out with Bernays in the 1920s. He sold women on the idea that smoking meant freedom. It meant nothing of the kind. It meant that tobacco manufacturers got to increase their market and make more money, which is, of course, what all of this is about. See, during World War I, different companies had learned production on a scale that they had never had before. And as a result, what you have is more and more product for people who don't need them. And at the time, goods were advertised logically based on their durability and their economic value to the customers. In other words, you advertise shoes based on how long those shoes would last, how durable they were, how they were going to keep your feet dry and warm for a decade to come, how you wouldn't need to buy another pair of shoes for a long time. Now, when you've got manufacturers cranking out 10 pairs of shoes to every person in the country, the last thing you want is shoes that will last a long, long time. What you need to do is convince people to buy things they don't actually need. And this is where it all begins. Bernays, there was a man named Paul Mazur who was a Wall Street banker. And Paul Mazur said that the public should be shifted from a need-based economy to a desire-based economy. That in essence, we need to retrain people to stop thinking about only what they need and start making them desire things they don't need. This is what actually gave birth to department stores. It was New York bankers who created these chains of department stores across the country because they needed a place to showcase and warehouse all of their new products that they were producing at an unprecedented rate. And Bernays was one of the primary people post-World War I that people tapped to do this. Now, in aid of doing this, Bernays pioneered several techniques that I'm sure you'll be familiar with today. William Randolph Hearst hired Bernays to sell his magazines, and Bernays did this by glamorizing the magazines, by placing ads for products for others of his clients in those magazines, and then linked those to celebrities at the time. So, for instance, he was selling hats for such and such company. So he then hired Clara Bow, the it girl, the Hollywood it girl of the time, to wear these hats and get pictures taken of her. And then those pictures of her wearing those hats were placed in Hearst's magazines. He created celebrity endorsement. He created the very idea of, well, this famous person wears it. You want to be like this famous person, don't you? Then you want to buy this hat. Now, he represented the magazine and he represented the hat company. So he was making out on both ends, and in essence creating this synergy between different parts of business to reinforce and bolster each other. He also came up with the concept of product placement in movies. He was the first to put a particular thing in a very, very visible place in a popular film of the time in aid of just subconsciously advertising that to people. And this synergy went even further. Bernays would dress Hollywood celebrities in clothes from manufacturers that he represented and then have them wear those clothes to the red carpet gala premiere of the film. That also had product placement in it from him, and so on. So he begins to create this overarching web of advertisers working together in order to create a sort of synergy between different powerful corporations. Bernays was the first person. He takes credit as being the first person to link the idea of selling cars as literally symbols of male sexuality. And I think you can agree, if you're an American, that the idea of the car and the penis are very much linked in our society. He was the first person to come up with these kind of independent studies. So basically, Bernays would hire doctors or to say that certain products, he would hire psychologists to say certain products were good for people emotionally, that they would make them happy. He would get them to publish these reports, and then he would come along and and say that he discovered these independent studies by different psychologists that all agreed that these products were good for you. So first he'd get them to create the studies, then he would claim to have discovered the studies and that the studies all agreed, and that's why you should do it. So all of this is going on, but here's the one that hurt me the most personally. Now, post the war, you get a lot of people coming back from war, and they've been in trenches, right? They haven't been getting paid. The soldiers have the clothes they had before they left. They have the clothes the military issued them. They have the clothes that they bought while they were in the trenches, and I mean the clothes they bought while they were on leave at various times in the war. So These people are all coming back from the war, and they have a lot of disposable income, and manufacturers have a lot more clothes to sell them. So how do you sell people clothes they don't need? Bernays organized fashion shows in the department stores that were created owing to this advertising mecca that was going on. And he would get celebrities of the day to come on stage to talk about the psychology of dress. Now, there are literal film clips of this where you can see a woman from the time who I believe was an aviatrix that was very famous, saying to the crowd that you're all such lovely people, but when I look at you, I can't tell anything about your personality. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about the psychology of dress? Have you ever thought about dressing in a way that will illustrate your personality, that will bring out qualities that you think may be hidden in you and show them to other people? The idea of dressing as an individual, the idea of dressing to express yourself, is an idea that was sold to us by Edward Bernays for no other reason than he was contracted to sell clothes to people who didn't need more clothes. Now, if you think about what this means, if you go into the 1950s and you get greasers and you get the beatniks coming into the 60s and you get hippies and then you get punks and goths and all of these different movements may have been organized around different ideals and principles, but the idea that we dress to illustrate our tribe, that was sold to us. That was sold to us by Edward Bernays back in the 1920s in aid of getting us to buy things that we didn't need, in aid of getting us to spend money for something that had no value to us. If you go back, you can verify this. If you go back and look at film clips from the 1920s and 30s, what you see is men all wearing the same silhouette, a suit jacket, a tie, a hat, and so on. You see women all wearing the same dress, perhaps carrying a parasol, wearing a hat, and so on. It is not until Bernays begins to sell us the idea of the psychology of dress that you get people dressing to illustrate their personality. Think about what that means as an American. If you were ever part of a sub or counterculture in this country, then that very concept, the idea of dressing in an anti-uniform, if you will, was sold to us by a guy who was just hawking clothes. It's that simple. Now, it was this very rise in consumerism that created the stock market in America in the first place. Americans spending more and more on products they didn't need created the American stock market. And in 1927, a news article that came out stated that, quote, "A change has come over our democracy. It is called consumptionism. The American citizen's first import to his country is now no longer that of citizen, but that of consumer." And into this, the stock market comes into being, and Bernays, who is representing certain banks, begins to sell individual people on the idea of playing the stock market. And in many instances, he does so by getting them to borrow money from the banks that he represents. And as I'm sure you're aware, this caused a great many people to go bankrupt. You know what? I'm going to stop this video here because I want to leave you with that kind of lingering thought that the very idea of dressing as an individual was sold to us by a manipulator who was simply trying to sell clothes. And I want you to kind of dwell on that. The next video, I'm going to do another video on Bernays. We'll do this until I feel like I've made the point. The next video will kind of take over from there. And we'll begin with Herbert Hoover, who was a very, let's say, pro-business president. And I'm going to show you how politics and Bernays' psychological techniques began to be inexorably linked because business became involved in politics. The whole FDR New Deal thing was basically a direct response to the rise of corporate power in America. And it led to basically corporations more or less declaring war on the government at the time. And I will go into that next time. But in the meantime, I just want you to think about the things I've talked about today. Please feel free to leave comments. Please feel free to agree or disagree. I would ask that you do so respectfully and not hatefully. I know some of you will anyway, because I know which side of the divide you're on, and you're incapable of using rational argument because you've been so propagandized for decades that your emotional responses override your intellectual capabilities. And so I won't hate on you for it. I feel sorry for you. I hope you're able to overcome that. But for the rest of you, please think about these ideas. Please look up Edward Bernays. Look up Edward Bernays and Guatemala, because a lot of Americans know the phrase Banana Republic, but they think it's a clothing chain. Please look up what that really means. And my next video should be up in the next day or two, and I'll kind of proceed from the point I left off here. I hope you're well. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you found something informative in it. If you did, please like, subscribe, and all that stuff. And I'll talk to you next time. Peace, baby.